Darkness, complete and absolute, not the darkness of a moonless night, where your eyes might adjust and discern shapes against shadow. No. This is darkness that existed before eyes evolved to see, the darkness so profound that your visual cortex begins creating phantom colors, swirls of violet and green that exist only in the desperate firing of neurons seeking any stimulus at all. You are waking in the belly of the earth itself. 300 million years ago, when the first reptiles crawled from ancient seas, these limestone walls began their patient accumulation. Layer upon microscopic layer, the compressed remains of countless marine creatures settled into sediment that would one day become your shelter. The stone remembers oceans that covered continents, remembers the slow dance of tectonic plates, remembers epochs before mammals walked the world. And now, in this fleeting moment of geological time, it cradles you against the killing cold of the Ice Age, winter raging outside. Consider for a moment what surrounds you. You lie within solid rock, yet you breathe. The temperature holds steady at 13 degrees Celsius, 55 degrees Fahrenheit, while outside, winds driven by the Fennoscandian ice sheet scream across the tundra at minus 30 degrees Celsius. The difference between these two numbers is the difference between consciousness and eternal sleep. Your hand moves in the darkness, following a pattern older than memory. It finds the smooth spot on the cave wall, where 10,000 hands before yours have reached in that same half-conscious gesture upon waking. The limestone here has been polished by 3,000 years of human touch, worn smooth as riverstone. This simple action feeling for the security of solid stone connects you to ancestors whose names were never recorded, whose faces you will never know, but whose DNA spirals through your cells in unbroken lineage. The cold makes itself known gradually. It seeps through the furs, wrapped around your body, through the dried grass bedding beneath you, through the very air itself. But it is a manageable cold, a survivable cold. Your sleeping alcove maintains 8 degrees warmer than the main chamber, a temperature differential achieved through careful positioning against the cave's interior wall, where residual geothermal heat rises from the Earth's mantle 20 miles below. You are not alone in the darkness. The breathing of 37 others creates a rhythm, a collective pulse of humanity synchronized in sleep. Infants nestle against mothers. Children curl together like wolf cubs. The elderly occupy the warmest positions, closest to where the fire will soon burn. This arrangement is not random. It represents calculations of survival so ancient they have become instinct. Every position in this cave has been optimized over millennia to balance heat retention, air quality, and social bonds. The fire. Even before your eyes open, you know it has burned down to embers. The quality of darkness tells you this. So does the drop in temperature. So does the absence of that particular crackling whisper that burning wood makes a sound so constant in cave life that its absence screams louder than any noise. This fire has burned continuously for 8 months. Think about that. Not 8 hours, not 8 days. 8 months of constant vigilance, of feeding, of protecting this miracle of controlled combustion that stands between your band and extinction. Letting it die would mean starting over with the bow drill method, 45 minutes of intense physical labor, spinning a wooden shaft against a fireboard until friction generates enough heat to ignite dried fungus tinder. In temperatures this cold, with fingers this numb, the success rate drops below 50%. You cannot let it die. The ritual of fire awakening begins before conscious thought. Your body knows the sequence the way your heart knows to beat. You rise slowly, preserving body heat, wrapping furs tighter against the cave's breath. Yes, the cave breathes. During cold nights like this, air flows inward through the entrance, drawn by temperature differentials that create a pressure gradient. During warmer days, the flow reverses. This natural ventilation system keeps smoke at tolerable levels, while maintaining the precise humidity between 60 and 70% that prevents the respiratory infections that killed half of all children living in the open. Your feet find the path worn into the stone floor. In complete darkness, you walk with confidence because this route has been walked for 3,000 years. The limestone beneath your feet has been worn into a shallow groove, polished smooth by countless journeys between sleeping areas and the central hearth. The cave itself has become an extension of the human body, every surface shaped by use, every turn memorized in muscle and bone. The embers glow like dying stars in the vast darkness. The oldest firekeeper, a woman of perhaps 45 years, an age so advanced she is considered a repository of ancestral wisdom, kneels beside you. Together, without words, you begin the ceremony of resurrection. First, you must assess what remains. You lean close, feeling the heat against your face. The temperature of embers tells you everything. These glow dull red, perhaps 200 degrees Celsius. Sufficient, just barely sufficient. From the deepest chambers of the cave, where you have stored them in the driest microclimate, you retrieve the smallest twigs. These have been collected and dried for weeks, selected for their low moisture content, less than 15% by weight. Size matters absolutely. Each twig must be no thicker than a wheat stalk. Place them too close together and you smother the embers. Too far apart and heat dissipates before combustion spreads. The old woman arranges them in a pattern that looks like art but is pure physics. She creates a structure that allows oxygen to flow while concentrating heat at critical points. The mathematics of combustion play out in her hands without equations or conscious calculation. She knows, as her grandmothers knew, that fire requires three things in perfect balance: fuel, oxygen, and heat. Remove any one element and darkness returns. You blow gently on the embers. Not too hard that would scatter ash over the glowing core, not too soft that would fail to supply sufficient oxygen. Your breath must match the rhythm of the fire's need. You watch for the telltale brightening, the shift from dull red to orange that signals temperature rising past 300 degrees Celsius. There, the first twig catches. A tiny flame, no larger than your fingernail, flickers into existence. It is the most important thing in your world at this moment. Nations rise and fall on such small flames. Civilizations balance on the edge of such fragile light. The ritual takes 40 minutes. 40 minutes of absolute focus, of progressive additions. Twigs the thickness of your little finger, then your thumb, then small branches selected for their density and burning characteristics. Pine for quick heat and aromatic smoke that masks the smell of unwashed bodies. Oak for sustained coals that will last through the day. Birch bark that catches readily, its papery layers containing oils that have evolved over millions of years to make the tree's skin water-resistant oils that now serve your desperate need for reliable ignition. As light returns to the cave, the world rebuilds itself, piece by piece. First, the circle of faces around the hearth, eyes reflecting flame, as human eyes have reflected flame for 400,000 years. Then the walls, and oh, what these walls reveal! The ceiling stretches 20 feet above, blackened by 50 generations of smoke. The carbon residue up there contains stories, chemical signatures of every tree species burned, every animal fat rendered, every desperate winter survived. The walls are polished smooth where bodies have brushed past for millennia, but they are not blank. Everywhere you look, humanity has left its mark. Handprints in red ochre, some so old they were made when mammoths still ruled the steppes. Geometric patterns scratched into the stone, counting marks, perhaps, or territorial claims, or the first groping attempts at mathematical notation. In one alcove, barely visible in the growing light, Someone has engraved the outline of a horse so lifelike you can almost hear it snort. This cave is a living cathedral, not in any religious sense, though perhaps that too. No, it lives in the sense that it functions as a single organism. Every surface serves a purpose. Every chamber has evolved through trial and error into its optimal use. The sleeping alcoves in the rear maintain warmth. The entrance area, colder by 10 degrees, serves as a refrigerator where meat hangs preserved by cold and smoke. The deepest chambers, where temperature and humidity never vary, store dried foods, tools, and ceremonial objects. Water seeps through cracks in the limestone, filtered by 300 million years of rock into liquid so pure it requires no boiling. This seepage creates formations, stalactites and stalagmites, that grow at the rate of 1 inch per century. The youngest stalactite in this cave is 30 feet long. 3,000 years of patient mineral accumulation, drop by drop, century by century, epoch by epoch. The cave's breath, that inward flowing air during cold nights, carries sounds from outside. You hear them now as the fire strengthens and awareness expands beyond the immediate circle of light. Wind, the eternal wind of the Ice Age, howling across landscapes scoured bare by glaciers. That wind has blown without pause for 15,000 years, driven by temperature differentials between ice sheets and open ocean, moving at speeds that would strip flesh from bone if you stood exposed for more than minutes. But you are not exposed. You are sheltered within stone that has weathered the rise and fall of mountain ranges, that has survived meteor impacts and volcanic eruptions, that will endure long after your species has vanished into the future or extinction. This knowledge should make you feel small, insignificant. Instead, there is comfort in it. You are part of something larger than any individual life, part of a continuity that stretches back to the first humans who sought shelter in caves and forward to descendants you will never meet. The morning meal begins as the fire reaches full strength. This is not a leisurely breakfast. This is fuel for bodies that will burn 5,000 calories today just to maintain body temperature and perform basic tasks. Meat from the cold storage chamber reindeer killed 3 days ago gets sliced into strips and placed on hot stones ringing the fire. The smell of cooking protein awakens the entire band. Children emerge from sleeping furs, rubbing eyes, coughing slightly as their lungs adjust to smoke levels that would be considered toxic in any modern dwelling, but which here represent acceptable compromise. The elderly move more slowly, joints stiffened by arthritis that begins in the 20s in this era, progresses through every decade, makes survival past 50 an achievement worthy of reverence. As light grows and bodies warm, the cave reveals its true nature. This is not merely shelter, this is the accumulated wisdom of your species made manifest in stone. Every person here carries knowledge that took 1,700 generations to acquire. The child playing with a flint nodule, turning it over in small hands, examines an object that required 10,000 years of experimentation to understand. The woman sewing torn clothing with an ivory needle knows techniques that emerged from 50,000 iterations across countless cultural groups. You are all time travelers, carrying the past into the present, creating the future through every action, every decision, every moment of survival. The cave entrance brightens with dawn, not the sun itself, which will not clear the horizon for another hour, but the scattered light of approaching day. The difference is immediately apparent. Temperature at the entrance is still -20 degrees Celsius, but it is no longer the killing -30 of deepest night. This 10-degree change, this modest shift in the thermometer, means you can venture outside without immediate risk of frostbite. The world beyond the cave entrance is white, endless white. Snow covers the landscape to depths of 3 feet, smoothing every contour, erasing every landmark except the most prominent. The ice sheet itself, the Fennoscandian colossus that has buried Scandinavia under ice 2 miles thick, dominates the northern horizon. You cannot see the ice from here, but you can feel it. It exerts gravitational pull sufficient to create measurable tides in the Earth's crust. It affects weather patterns across the entire continent. It is a presence, vast and patient, and utterly indifferent to human existence. This ice sheet has been growing for 90,000 years. It will continue growing for another 15,000. You live in the depths of the Ice Age, in conditions that would kill modern humans equipped with modern technology within days. Yet you thrive. Not merely survive, thrive. Your band has grown from 23 members 5 years ago to 37 today. Children laugh despite the cold. Adults plan hunts and craft tools and tell stories and engage in all the behaviors that make humanity more than just another species clinging to existence. How is this possible? The answer lies in understanding, accumulated grain by grain across unimaginable stretches of time. You understand that wet clothing kills faster than cold alone, so garments are changed and dried constantly. You understand that exposed skin dies in minutes, so every inch of flesh stays covered except for brief intervals. You understand that the cave's 13-degree temperature is not warmth but is survivable, while the outside -30 is not. You understand fire, its needs, its moods, its dangers, its gifts. You understand stone, how it fractures, how it can be shaped into tools sharper than any surgeon's scalpel. You understand animals, their patterns, their vulnerabilities, the seasons of their abundance and scarcity. You understand community, that 37 humans working together can accomplish what 307 individuals cannot. This knowledge lives in your hands and eyes and instincts. It is not written down because writing will not be invented for another 28,000 years. It is not formally taught because schools will not exist until long after the last mammoth dies. Instead, it passes through demonstration and practice, and the cruel pedagogy of survival, where mistakes often mean death and success means simply reaching tomorrow. The fire burns strong now, warming the main chamber to barely above freezing. This is luxury. This is the thermal equilibrium your species has achieved with its environment. Not by changing the environment, not yet, but by finding spaces within it where life remains possible. The cave accepts you, as it has accepted all those who came before. The limestone walls hold your heat, reflect your firelight, amplify your voices when you sing the old songs that bind the band together. You are awake now, fully present in this moment 30,000 years before the present day. The dawn of another Ice Age morning has arrived. The fire burns. The band gathers. Outside, the wind howls its eternal song of cold and distance. But here, within stone 300 million years in the making, humanity endures. The journey that brought your ancestors to this cave began 60,000 years ago in a place you have never seen and never will. The Africa. The Rift Valley, where humanity was born. Imagine for a moment the distances involved. From the limestone caves of East Africa to these northern sanctuaries represents a journey of 9,000 miles. 9,000 miles travelled on foot, carrying everything needed for survival, crossing mountains and deserts and rivers, navigating by stars and seasonal patterns and the collective memory of the band. But here is what staggers the mind. This journey took 2,000 generations to complete. 2,000 generations. Each group moved perhaps 15 miles in their entire lifetime. Not 15 miles per year or per decade, 15 miles total. A lifetime's wandering might take a band from one valley to the next, from one cave system to another visible on the horizon. The pace of migration was measured not in human time but in geological time, driven by climate shifts so gradual that no single generation perceived them. The ice advanced, the ice retreated, and humanity followed the narrow corridors of survivability. 90,000 years ago, the first pioneers left Africa during a climate window when the Sahara bloomed green. What is now lifeless desert was then savanna, dotted with lakes fed by monsoons, supporting vast herds of gazelle and antelope. These migrants carried with them the knowledge of caves, of fire, of stone tools technologies already ancient by that time, refined over hundreds of thousands of years. At Caveman cave, in what is now Israel, they paused. Excavations in this cave have revealed something extraordinary, the oldest deliberate burials yet discovered. 90,000 years ago, people who looked anatomically like you and me placed their dead in graves, covered them with red ochre that had been carried 300 miles from its source, and surrounded them with shells and tools. This was not mere disposal of bodies. This was ceremony. This was belief in something beyond the immediate, beyond the visible, beyond the cave's dark walls. The ochre is particularly telling. Red iron oxide, ground to powder, mixed with fat to create pigment. Why red? Why carry it 300 miles? The effort required to obtain this material, to process it, to reserve it for the dead. This speaks to minds capable of symbol, of meaning, of connecting the seen world with the unseen. The red perhaps represented blood, or life force, or the promise of rebirth. We can never know with certainty, but we know it mattered enough to be worth 300 miles of carrying. From Caveman, the corridors branched. Some groups turned east, following coastlines toward India, and eventually Australia. Others pressed north, toward Europe and the caves that would become your heritage. But then, 74,000 years ago, the journey nearly ended forever. The Toba supervolcano, on the island of Sumatra, erupted with a force almost impossible to comprehend. It ejected 2,800 cubic kilometers of ash and rock into the atmosphere. The eruption was heard across half the planet. The ash cloud blocked sunlight for 6 years, plunging the world into volcanic winter. Global temperatures dropped by 15 degrees Celsius. Monsoons failed, plants died, animals starved, and humanity, already scattered in small bands across Africa and the Middle East, faced extinction. Genetic evidence tells us what happened next. The human population crashed to perhaps 3,000 individuals. 3,000 people. That's smaller than many modern towns. Every human alive today descends from those survivors. People who found caves deep enough, who had stored enough food, who maintained their fires through 6 years of darkness and cold, who refused to surrender to extinction. The caves saved us. There is no other way to say it. When the volcanic winter finally ended, when sunlight returned and plants began growing again, humanity emerged from its stone refuges carrying a genetic bottleneck that persists to this day. We are all cousins, separated by at most 2,000 generations. The diversity you see in human populations, different skin colors, different features, different adaptations, represents variation that emerged in the 60,000 years since Toba. Before that catastrophe, before that near extinction, humanity was even more closely related. The migration resumed, slowly, cautiously, following the same principle that had always guided movement: go where energy is abundant, avoid where it is scarce. This is not philosophy or strategy, but pure thermodynamics. A human body requires approximately 2,000 calories per day to maintain basic functions. During the Ice Age, with temperatures demanding constant heat production, that requirement doubled or tripled. Every decision about movement was fundamentally a calculation about calories. Will the energy gained by relocating exceed the energy spent in the journey? 60,000 years ago, sea levels dropped 450 feet below present levels. That much water, locked in ice sheets covering a quarter of Earth's land surface, exposed continental shelves that are now deep beneath the waves. The most significant of these was the Bering Land Bridge, not a narrow isthmus, but a grassland 2,000 kilometers wide, connecting Asia and Alaska. Imagine this landscape. Mammoth Steppe, it's called, an ecosystem that no longer exists anywhere on Earth. Grasses grew thick enough to support megafauna in densities rivaling the Serengeti. Mammoths, mastodons, woolly rhinoceros, giant elk with antlers spanning 12 feet, cave lions larger than modern tigers. These animals created paths through the grass, following routes from water source to feeding ground, generation after generation, until their trails became highways visible from miles away. Your ancestors followed these paths. They had to. The mammoths knew where water was. The mammoths knew which valleys held the best grazing, which ridges offered shelter from storms. Human intelligence lay not in conquering nature, but in reading it, in understanding that the wisdom of survival was already written in animal behavior, refined by millions of years of evolution. The physics of migration followed predictable patterns. Groups moved when the energy cost of staying exceeded that of relocating. Perhaps the local game had been overhunted. Perhaps a clan dispute made coexistence impossible. Perhaps simple curiosity, that peculiarly human trait, drove young adults to see what lay beyond the horizon. Whatever the specific trigger, the mathematics remained constant. A group of 30 people traveling 15 miles might burn 30,000 calories in the journey. That meant killing at least one large animal upon arrival, or finding a productive fishing spot, or locating berry patches. Failure meant starvation. The caves guided the routes. You cannot survive northern winters without shelter, and not just any shelter. You need caves with specific characteristics. The entrance must face away from prevailing winds. The interior must maintain temperatures above freezing. There must be water, either from seepage or from a nearby source that doesn't freeze solid. There must be wood for fires within a day's travel. And ideally, there should be game migration routes for reindeer or bison, fishing grounds, foraging areas. Caves meeting all these criteria are rare. Your ancestors learned to recognize geological formations that suggested caves, particular types of limestone, certain patterns of erosion, the presence of sinkholes indicating underground chambers. When they found a suitable cave, they often stayed for generations, sometimes centuries. And when climate shifts or resource depletion forced them to move, they searched for similar caves, similar formations, similar refuges. By 40,000 years ago, humans had reached Europe. They found a continent already occupied not by other humans, but by Neanderthals, another species of the genus Homo that had adapted to Ice Age conditions for 300,000 years. The Neanderthals were cave dwellers too, masters of the same survival strategies, users of fire and tools, and cooperative hunting. What happened next is written in both genetics and archaeology. The two species encountered each other in the caves of Europe and the Middle East. They did not merely compete, they interbred. Between 1 and 4% of modern non-African human DNA comes from Neanderthals. This means your ancestors didn't simply replace the previous occupants of these caves, they merged with them. Children born from these unions carried genes from both lineages, including Neanderthal adaptations for cold tolerance, immune system variations, even aspects of skeletal structure. But something shifted the balance. Gradually, over 10,000 years, Neanderthal populations declined, while human populations expanded. Was it superior technology, more efficient hunting, better communication, more adaptable culture? The answer is probably all of these, and none of these small advantages compounding over thousands of generations until one lineage thrived and the other vanished. The last Neanderthals died 39,000 years ago in caves on the Iberian Peninsula. They left behind tools and hearths, and the faint genetic echo in our DNA. And humans, alone now as the only surviving member of the genus Homo, inherited the entirety of the Ice Age world. The migration that brought your ancestors here, to this specific cave, represents the culmination of 60,000 years of dispersal. The knowledge accumulated along that journey lives in everything you do. The way you start fires was learned in African caves 400,000 years ago. The tools you chip from flint were invented before your species existed, refined by earlier human ancestors and passed down through so many generations that their origin has dissolved into myth. You are the inheritor of the longest, continuous survival story in the history of complex life on Earth. Every other human species has gone extinct. Every other hominin lineage has ended. But your ancestors persisted through volcanic winters and ice ages, through droughts and floods, through every catastrophe the planet could deliver. They persisted by finding shelter in stone, by maintaining fire through the darkest nights, by working together when solitude meant death. The cave you woke in this morning is part of that story. The smooth walls touched by 10,000 hands connect directly to the Kwafse cave, where ochre-covered bodies were buried 90,000 years ago. The fire you tend descends in unbroken lineage from the first controlled flames in African caves. The knowledge in your hands travelled 9,000 miles and 2,000 generations to arrive at this moment. Think about that when you strike flint against stone. Think about that when you arrange wood in the precise pattern that will coax embers into flame. You are not simply surviving. You are continuing a journey that has no destination, only the imperative to persist, to adapt, to endure. The ice outside howls its ancient song. The cave holds you in its stone embrace. And the story continues, generation by generation, carried forward by people who will never know your name, but who will inherit everything you are, everything you know, everything you preserve through the simple act of surviving one more day. The journey is not over. It will never be over. As long as consciousness stirs in darkness, as long as hands reach for the comfort of stone, as long as fire burns against the cold, the journey continues. The transformation from prey to predator required understanding forces and materials with a precision that would satisfy any modern engineer. Consider the wooden spear leaning against the cave wall near the entrance. To you, it is simply a tool, as familiar as your own hand. But examine it more closely, through the lens of physics and biology, and it becomes a miracle of applied mathematics. The shaft is made from young ash, selected not randomly but according to criteria refined over thousands of trials and errors. Ash combines flexibility with strength in proportions that allow the spear to absorb impact without shattering. The wood was cut in late autumn when sap concentration is lowest, then dried for 6 months in the cave's stable humidity to achieve moisture content of exactly 12%. Too wet, and the wood warps. Too dry, and it becomes brittle. The tip has been fire-hardened, held in flames at precisely the right distance to char the surface fibers without burning through. This creates a layer of carbon that is harder than the surrounding wood, capable of penetrating hide and muscle. But here is the critical calculation. To pierce the thick skin of a mammoth, which can be 2 inches thick and tougher than modern leather, the spear tip must deliver 800 pounds per square inch of pressure at the moment of impact. 800 pounds per square inch. This requires approach speeds of 30 feet per second. A human throwing arm, even with an atlatl, a spear thrower that will not be invented for another 12,000 years, cannot generate this velocity. The only solution is gravity combined with body weight. You must drop from above or charge from a position where momentum accumulates, driving the spear with your entire mass behind it. This is why mammoth hunting succeeds only at carefully chosen locations. The caves serve not just as homes but as strategic positions. Your ancestors selected this cave partly because it overlooks a natural funnel, a valley where mammoth migration routes narrow between 2 ridges. When the herds pass in spring and autumn, hunters can position themselves on the ridge tops, can launch spears from elevated positions where gravity becomes an ally, where 30 feet of vertical drop translates into enough velocity to pierce, hide that has evolved over millions of years to resist the claws of cave lions. but a single spear rarely kills a mammoth. The animal weighs 12,000 pounds, has a heart the size of a large cooking pot, and possesses enough strength to shatter trees with its tusks. A wounded mammoth is perhaps the most dangerous thing in the Ice Age world, an enraged mountain of muscle and ivory that will pursue attackers for miles, that will remember the scent of the hunters who hurt it, that may return to the cave entrance and wait in ambush. So the strategy evolved, not a single strike, but coordinated ambush. 20 hunters positioned along the migration route, each with multiple spears, attacking simultaneously to maximize trauma, to drive the animal toward bogs or soft ground where its immense weight becomes a liability. The entire hunt represents a calculation of energy and risk. One successful kill provides 30,000 pounds of meat, enough to feed a band of 30 people for 4 months. But the energy expenditure is enormous. Hunters might pursue an injured mammoth for 72 hours, covering 40 miles, burning 8,000 calories per day while maintaining constant pressure. The mathematics of survival plays out in every action. Fire. You tend it multiple times each day, but do you truly understand what you are managing? Fire is a chemical reaction combustion where carbon and hydrogen in wood combine with oxygen to release energy as heat and light. The flame itself is not a substance but a process, a visible zone where this reaction occurs most intensely. Maintaining fire requires balancing 3 elements: fuel, oxygen, and heat. The ancient knowledge passed down through countless generations can be expressed as the combustion triangle. Remove any point, and the triangle collapses, the fire dies. Too much oxygen and wood burns too quickly, wasting precious fuel that took hours to gather. Too little oxygen and combustion becomes incomplete, producing carbon monoxide, a colorless, odorless gas that kills by preventing blood from carrying oxygen. The early symptoms are subtle: headache, dizziness, confusion. By the time you realize what is happening, your judgment is already impaired. You may lie down to rest and never wake. The cave's natural ventilation prevents this, but only if you understand airflow. During cold nights, dense outside air sinks and flows inward along the cave floor. Inside air, warmed by fire, rises and flows outward along the ceiling. This creates a circulation pattern, a respiratory system for the cave itself. But if you block the entrance too thoroughly against cold, if you reduce airflow below critical levels, carbon monoxide accumulates. Every winter, some bands die this way, found in their sleeping furs, showing no signs of violence, killed by invisible poison from their own fires. You know the warning signs. You know to watch the flame's color. Blue indicates complete combustion, efficient burning. Yellow or orange shows incomplete combustion, potential danger. You know to place a small bowl of water near sleeping areas. If moisture condenses on the outside of the bowl despite the fire burning, humidity is too high and ventilation insufficient. These are not superstitions but survival protocols developed through tragic experience. Stone tools represent another form of engineering, equally precise in their requirements. The flint hand axe you are shaping near the fire demands understanding of material properties that would satisfy a modern material scientist. Flint is cryptocrystalline quartz, formed over millions of years as silica-rich water percolated through limestone. Its internal structure consists of microscopic crystals, oriented randomly, giving it special properties. When struck, it fractures along predictable planes, creating edges that can be sharper than surgical steel. A properly made flint edge, measured under microscope, shows irregularities at the molecular level smaller than the wavelength of visible light, but creating such edges requires knowledge. You must select the right stone. Not all flint is suitable. You must recognize the subtle color variations and texture differences that indicate internal flaws. You must understand strike angles. Hit the stone at less than 60 degrees and the blow glances off. Hit it at more than 90 degrees and the stone shatters unpredictably. The sweet spot lies between 60 and 80 degrees, where percussive force propagates through the crystalline structure in ways that can be shaped, controlled, directed. Each strike must be calculated. Too hard and you waste material. Too soft and nothing happens. You are reading the stone, predicting how force will travel through its structure, anticipating the shape of the flake that will detach. This knowledge lives in your hands, accumulated through 10,000 hours of practice beginning in childhood. Your fingers can detect surface irregularities invisible to the eye. Your ears hear the subtle sound differences between solid stone and stone with internal fractures. The process of creating a single hand axe might take 3 hours. You will strike the core stone perhaps 200 times, removing flakes with such precision that archaeologists 30,000 years in the future will be able to reconstruct your exact sequence of blows. The finished tool will have edges sharp enough to slice through mammoth hide, a point capable of piercing bone, and a weight distribution that allows it to be used as both knife and hammer. But here is what makes it remarkable. The flint you are working was formed 40 million years ago, when the limestone surrounding it was still being deposited in shallow seas. The knowledge you are applying emerged over 2 million years of tool-making tradition, and the tool you create today might be used for the next 20 years, might be passed to your children, might outlast you by centuries, lying in the cave floors accumulating layers until it tells your story to people who will never know your name. Food preservation represents another engineering challenge, solved through understanding chemistry and microbiology without knowing those words exist. Meat hung in the cave's entrance area, where temperature hovers around 39 degrees Fahrenheit, undergoes a transformation. In the first 3 days, enzymes within the meat break down proteins, tenderizing the flesh. This is controlled decomposition, allowing certain chemical changes while preventing others. After 3 days, the meat develops a dry crust as moisture evaporates in the cave's constant airflow. This crust protects the interior from bacterial contamination. Properly managed, meat can last 21 days at this temperature, but 21 days is not enough for winter. You need months of storage. The solution is smoking passing meat through the fire's smoke for days, coating it with phenols and aldehydes that prevent bacterial growth. The chemistry is complex, but the result is simple. Smoked meat lasts 6 months, providing protein through the longest winters when hunting becomes impossible. The cold itself becomes a tool. During the deepest cold snaps, when outside temperature drops below -20 degrees Celsius, meat left at the cave entrance freezes solid within hours. Frozen meat, if kept consistently frozen, lasts indefinitely. The challenge is maintaining consistent cold. A single thaw followed by refreezing creates ice crystals that damage cell structure, spoiling the meat. You have learned to read weather with the same precision you read stone. A ring around the moon means ice crystals in the upper atmosphere, storms arriving within 36 hours with 80% reliability. Specific cloud formations, high cirrus, followed by descending stratus, predict temperature drops of 20 degrees within 6 hours. The behavior of animals provides additional data. When ravens gather in unusual numbers, they sense approaching pressure changes imperceptible to human senses. When reindeer suddenly move from high ground to valleys, a blizzard is coming. This meteorological knowledge determines survival. Being caught in the open during a sudden storm means death within hours. But predicting storms allows preparation, gathering extra firewood, bringing in frozen meat from outside storage, sealing the cave entrance against wind, moving sleeping areas deeper where temperature remains most stable. The cave bears present a different kind of engineering problem, one of coexistence with creatures that could easily kill you. These animals stand 8 feet tall on their hind legs. They weigh 1,500 pounds, with claws 4 inches long and jaws that can crush bone, yet they are not aggressive by nature. They are primarily herbivorous, eating plants, roots, and occasionally carrion. They enter caves to hibernate, seeking the same stable temperatures that attract humans. Understanding their hibernation cycle is crucial. In October, as temperatures drop and food becomes scarce, bears begin seeking winter dens. They prefer the deepest, most stable chambers, the same chambers where humans store food and ceremonial objects. Conflict is inevitable unless you understand the signs. A bear preparing for hibernation feeds heavily, consuming up to 50 pounds of food per day to build fat reserves. Its behavior becomes predictable. It follows the same routes to the cave, returns at the same time each evening, shows little interest in anything except food and finding the perfect sleeping spot. Once settled, its body temperature drops from 37 degrees Celsius to match the cave's temperature around 10 degrees Celsius. Its heartbeat slows from 40 beats per minute to 4. Its breathing becomes shallow and rhythmic. 16 seconds between breaths means deep hibernation, completely safe to pass nearby. 12 seconds between breaths means semi-consciousness, a state where sudden noise or movement might trigger defensive aggression. You have learned to coexist. The bears take the deepest chambers from October through March. Humans use the middle chambers, maintaining fire and activity. The bear's presence provides unexpected benefits. Their breath adds humidity to the cave's air, preventing the excessive dryness that causes respiratory problems. Their bodies generate heat, raising the deepest chamber temperatures by several degrees, and their hibernation fat, if one dies naturally during winter, provides emergency food rich in calories that might save the band during desperate times. This coexistence required centuries to develop. Early encounters likely ended in tragedy: bears killed, humans injured, resources wasted in conflict. But gradually, through observation and adaptation, a protocol emerged. The bears hibernate in the depths. The humans live in the middle zones. The entrance serves as shared territory where each species respects the other's presence. It is an arrangement based on understanding forces and behaviors, on calculating risks and benefits, on engineering a solution to a problem that could easily be fatal. Like everything else in Ice Age survival, it represents accumulated knowledge, transformed into practical wisdom, biology and physics and chemistry, applied without names or equations, but with absolute precision born from necessity. The spear against the wall, the fire in the hearth, the stone tools scattered across the working area, the meat hanging in the cold zone, the sleeping bear in the deepest darkness. Each represents a triumph of human intelligence over an environment designed to kill you. Each embodies principles that will eventually be written into textbooks, expressed in mathematical formulas, and taught in universities. But here, now, they simply are. Knowledge made manifest. Engineering without engineers. Science without scientists. The raw application of observation, experimentation, and transmitted wisdom that keeps 37 people alive through winter, in a world where exposure means death within hours. The cave hums with this knowledge. Every surface touched by human hands carries it. Every tool shaped from stone speaks it. Every wisp of smoke rising from carefully maintained flames testifies to it. Humanity survived the Ice Age not through strength or speed or natural weapons. Humanity survived through understanding. Understanding that began in caves and transformed those caves from mere shelters into laboratories where the foundations of civilization were slowly, carefully built. Deep in the cave's furthest chamber, where firelight barely reaches and shadows dance like living things, something extraordinary exists on the walls. Art, not decoration, not idle scratching or random marks. Art deliberate, planned, executed with skill that rivals anything created in the 30,000 years since. These paintings were not made by your generation or your parents' generation. They were created 300 years ago by artists whose names are forgotten but whose vision burns across the centuries with undiminished power. The main panel shows a pride of cave lions in mid-hunt. 5 animals, their bodies rendered with such anatomical precision that you can see individual muscles beneath their tawny coats and can read their posture and intent as clearly as if they stood before you in flesh. The lead lioness crouches low, her weight shifted forward onto her front legs, tail extended for balance. Behind her, 4 others fan out in the coordinated pattern that lions have used for millions of years, a formation designed to cut off escape routes, to funnel prey toward the killing zone. But how were these images created? What process, what materials, what techniques allowed artists working by flickering lamplight in cold darkness to produce work of such quality? The answer begins 30 miles from this cave, in locations known only to those who have spent lifetimes learning the landscape. The primary pigment red ochre comes from iron oxide deposits found in specific riverbeds where ancient rust has concentrated. Not just any iron oxide will do. The color must be precisely right, the consistency must allow grinding, and the source must be reliable across seasons and years. Gathering ochre requires a journey of 3 days each way. The band cannot spare many people for such expeditions, so usually 2 or 3 individuals make the trip, carrying woven baskets that will return heavy with chunks of raw mineral. These gatherers follow routes established over generations, routes that avoid territorial boundaries of rival bands, that cross rivers at specific fords, that pass by caves where emergency shelter is available if weather turns deadly. Back in the home cave, the ochre undergoes transformation. Using granite mortars, stones with natural depressions worn deeper through thousands of hours of grinding, artists pulverize the ochre chunks into powder finer than sand. This grinding takes time. 72 hours of rhythmic pounding to achieve the consistency needed for paint that will adhere to limestone and last millennia. But ochre powder alone is not enough. It must be mixed with a binder, something that will make it stick to the cave wall and remain flexible enough not to crack and flake away. The solution is fat, specifically cave bear fat rendered from the thick deposits that hibernating bears accumulate. The fat content must be precise. Too much and the paint runs. Too little and it does not bind properly. The correct ratio is approximately 3 parts pigment to 1 part fat, mixed thoroughly until the consistency resembles modern oil paint. Additional pigments expand the palette. Manganese dioxide, found in riverbeds as black nodules, provides deep blacks. Goethite, extracted from bog iron, gives yellows and browns. Charcoal from specific pine, species pines that grow only at certain elevations, creates the deepest blacks, richer than manganese alone. For the famous lion panel in Chauvet Cave, 200 miles from here, artists use 17 separate pigments gathered from locations up to 200 miles apart. 200 miles. Think about what that means. In an Ice Age landscape where a day's journey might cover 8 miles, 200 miles represents 25 days of travel each way, 50 days round trip for a single pigment. This speaks to the importance of these images, to the value placed on artistic expression, to the understanding that some things transcend mere survival. The placement of paintings follows rules you understand without conscious analysis. The lions are painted in a chamber where sound behaves in specific ways. Clap your hands here, and the echo lasts 7 seconds, bouncing off walls and ceiling in patterns that create the auditory impression of running hoofbeats. It is not coincidence. The artists knew this. They tested acoustics, found locations where sound reinforced image, where the sensory experience became total visual and auditory, a prehistoric multimedia presentation. In another chamber, bison cluster on walls where low-frequency sounds below 20 Hz, sounds below the range of human hearing, create vibrations felt in the chest like distant thunder. Modern acoustic analysis confirms what the artist discovered empirically. Certain locations in caves generate infrasound that triggers physiological responses, creating feelings of awe or fear without conscious reason. The bison paintings concentrate in these zones, suggesting the artists understood that placement enhanced emotional impact. The famous lion panel visible from where you sit took an estimated 400 hours to complete. Not 400 hours of continuous work that would be impossible. Instead, artists worked in 4-hour shifts, the maximum time sustainable before smoke. Inhalation from oil lamps becomes dangerous. These lamps, carved from limestone or fashioned from sandstone, burn seal blubber traded from coastal peoples 500 miles away. The trading networks that bring this blubber inland represent their own marvel of organization, but consider what it means. People 500 miles distant contribute to art created in this cave. The work is communal not just locally, but across vast territories, across tribal boundaries, across the entire landscape. The painting process itself demands skills refined over lifetimes. The artist begins by studying the cave wall, reading the limestone's contours and protrusions. A bulge in the rock might become a bison's shoulder. A depression might suggest a horse's eye socket. The art works with the stone, not against it, using natural features to create three-dimensional effects, visible only when light strikes from certain angles. Pigment is applied in multiple ways. Some areas are painted with fingers, leaving ridges and textures that catch light. Other sections use brushes, twigs, with the ends chewed to create bristles, or bundles of animal hair bound with sinew. For fine details, hollow bird bones serve as primitive airbrushes, allowing the artist to spray pigment by blowing through the bone at precisely 6 pounds per square inch of lung pressure. This creates the hand stencils that cover entire sections of cave wall. The artist places a hand against the stone, then sprays ochre around it, leaving a negative impression, a ghostly outline of fingers and palm that will endure for 30,000 years. Ultraviolet analysis of these hands reveals something unexpected. 70% were made by women and children. This discovery challenges assumptions about prehistoric art. These galleries were not created by specialized shamans working in isolation, but by communities, families, including children, participating in shared cultural expression. But why? Why invest hundreds of hours gathering pigments, preparing paint, creating these images? Why develop techniques of sophistication rivaling any modern art school? The paintings provide no calories. They do not sharpen spears or preserve meat or improve fire management. In a world where every action has survival consequences, why dedicate resources to art? The answer lies deeper than utility. It lies in what makes humans different from every other species that has ever existed. The flickering lamplight that illuminates these paintings does more than allow vision. Modern neuroscience has discovered that light flickering at certain frequencies stimulates temporal lobe activity identical to religious experiences. The oil lamps used in cave painting flicker at approximately 8 to 12 Hz, the same frequency that induces altered states of consciousness. The artists, working for hours in this flickering light, experienced neurological effects that likely felt spiritual, transcendent. Furthermore, many caves, including this one, generate electromagnetic fields measured at 8 Hz, the frequency of human alpha brainwaves associated with relaxation and heightened awareness. Stand in certain chambers and your brain synchronizes with the cave's electromagnetic rhythm, creating sensations of presence, connection, altered perception. These are not supernatural phenomena, but natural physics interacting with human neurology in ways that feel profound. The artists were not primitive mystics stumbling onto accidental effects. They were sophisticated observers who discovered empirically what scientists would later measure with instruments. They found locations where natural acoustics enhanced voice and drumming. They found chambers where electromagnetic fields created altered states. They learned which pigments glowed most vividly in firelight, which compositions commanded attention, which placements maximized impact, and they created galleries that served multiple functions simultaneously. They were educational spaces where children learned to recognize animals, to understand their behavior, to prepare for hunts they would eventually join. The anatomical accuracy of the paintings shows muscle structure, identifies weak points where spears might penetrate, illustrates herd dynamics and seasonal variations. They were ceremonial spaces where the band gathered before hunts, after successful kills, during seasonal celebrations. The acoustics that make echoes last 7 seconds also allow a single speaker to address 200 people without shouting. These chambers functioned as natural amphitheaters where stories were told, knowledge transmitted, social bonds reinforced through shared experience. They were memory palaces, mnemonic devices for storing information in a pre-literate world. Each image served as anchor for stories, techniques, histories. The lion panel might remind hunters of the time 20 years ago when a pride killed 3 band members. The bison sequence might encode seasonal migration patterns. The geometric symbols might represent territorial boundaries or water sources or safe routes through dangerous terrain. And yes, they were art pure aesthetic expression, the manifestation of human consciousness contemplating its own existence and finding the contemplation worth recording. The care taken in selecting pigments, the precision of execution, the emotional power of the compositions, these speak to minds capable of abstract thought, of symbol, of creating meaning beyond immediate necessity. Look at the cave lion's eye in the main panel. The artist has rendered it with a spot of white pigment over darker base color, creating the illusion of reflected light. This detail serves no practical purpose. It does not make the image more educational or the hunt more successful. It exists purely because the artist understood that this small touch of realism would make the lion more alive, more present, more powerful. That, understanding that beauty matters, that emotional impact has value, that how something is done can be as important as whether it is done, that understanding separates humans from all other species. Ravens use tools. Dolphins communicate. Elephants mourn their dead. But only humans create art that transcends function, that exists because the act of creation itself has meaning. The children of your band visit these painted chambers regularly. They trace the outlines with small fingers, mimic the animals' postures in play, ask questions about how the images were made. They are absorbing not just knowledge but culture, the accumulated aesthetic wisdom of 300 years. When they become adults and perhaps create their own paintings deeper in the cave system, they will carry forward this tradition, will add their voices to the visual conversation that spans generations. Some paintings in this cave are ancient, their pigments fading, their outlines obscured by mineral deposits. Others are recent, their colors still vivid. Together they form a chronology, a visual timeline of occupation, showing how artistic styles evolved, how techniques improved, how understanding of acoustics and placement deepened over centuries. Future archaeologists will study these paintings with technologies you cannot imagine: radiocarbon dating, spectrographic analysis, 3-dimensional modeling. They will discover that the charcoal used in certain images dates to specific years, allowing reconstruction of chronologies precise to within decades. They will analyze pigment chemistry and trace sources to specific geographic locations, mapping ancient trading networks. They will use acoustic modeling to confirm what you already know, that these chambers were chosen for their sonic properties, that the placement of images follows auditory logic. But no analysis, no matter how sophisticated, will fully capture what these paintings mean to the people who live with them daily. They are ancestors speaking across time. They are proof that others faced the same challenges, survived the same winters, hunted the same animals. They are continuity made visible, heritage written on stone, culture that persists despite individual mortality. The fire in the main chamber flickers. Its light cannot reach these deep galleries, but you carry lamps when you visit, and in their glow the painted animals seem to move, seem to breathe. The cave lions crouch in eternal hunt. The bison thunder across stone plains. The horses run toward horizons they will never reach. And you stand in darkness made meaningful, in stone made sacred through human attention, surrounded by evidence that your species is more than just another animal struggling to survive. You are artists, storytellers, creators of meaning. The Ice Age will eventually end, the glaciers will melt, the mammoths will vanish. But these images will remain, speaking to futures you cannot imagine, carrying forward the message that humans were here, that they observed, that they cared enough about beauty to spend 400 hours painting lions in darkness, that consciousness itself is worth celebrating. The gallery waits in permanent twilight, ready to instruct, inspire, and endure. 25,000 years ago, during the coldest phase of the Ice Age, something unprecedented occurred in caves across Europe. Multiple bands, normally separated by territories spanning hundreds of square miles, gathered together in single cave systems for the duration of winter. The motivation was simple mathematics. When temperatures dropped to -40 degrees Celsius and remained there for months, when snow accumulated to depths of 6 feet, when hunting became impossible and stored food ran dangerously low, isolation meant death. But together, sharing resources and body heat and the burden of fire maintenance, groups could survive conditions that would kill them individually. Your cave, during those desperate winters, housed not the current 37 people, but as many as 300. 300 people in chambers designed by nature for far fewer. 300 people sharing limited firewood, depleting stored food, breathing the same air, living in proximity that tested every social structure humanity had developed. These gatherings should have devolved into chaos, competition, violence. Instead, they became the crucible where complex society was forged. The limitation was neurological. The human brain can maintain stable social relationships with approximately 150 individuals. This number represents the maximum size of a group, where everyone can know everyone else personally, where social bonds can be maintained through direct interaction, where trust emerges from individual knowledge rather than abstract rules. But 300 people exceeds this limit by 100%. The solution that emerged was hierarchy, not the brutal dominant structures of other primates, but something subtler, more flexible, more distinctly human. Organizational innovations that would eventually scale to nations and civilizations had their origins in these overcrowded winter caves. Leadership emerged from demonstrated competence rather than physical strength alone. The oldest firekeeper, the one who had maintained flames through 50 winters, commanded authority over fire management. No one questioned her decisions about fuel allocation or when to bank the coals overnight. Her knowledge meant survival. Arguing with her meant potentially freezing. The most successful hunters directed hunting strategy. They decided when conditions allowed expeditions, which animals to target, how to divide the dangerous work among participants. Their authority derived not from size or aggression, though those helped, but from accumulated knowledge of animal behavior, weather patterns, seasonal movements. A young hunter might possess greater strength, but the elder hunter, who could predict reindeer migrations or identify approaching storms, held power that muscle could not match. The best flint knappers controlled tool production and, by extension, influenced hunting success and meat processing. Tool-making required years to master, and the best practitioners developed individual styles, signatures visible in the subtle patterns of their striking techniques. These master craftspeople trained apprentices, passing knowledge in formal student-teacher relationships that would eventually evolve into guild systems and educational traditions. But perhaps most importantly, those who could facilitate cooperation between bands, who could mediate disputes and negotiate resource sharing, became the first diplomats. Their skills were linguistic and psychological, the ability to read social dynamics, to propose solutions that allowed all parties to maintain dignity, to build consensus where conflict seemed inevitable. These were not necessarily the strongest or most skilled at survival tasks, but their contribution was equally vital. A single violent dispute between bands sharing winter quarters could result in deaths that weakened everyone. These roles were not rigid castes. The same person might be an excellent hunter and a skilled mediator. Leadership was situational, shifting based on immediate needs. During storms, the firekeeper's authority was absolute. During hunts, the hunting leaders commanded. During disputes, the mediators stepped forward. This flexibility prevented the concentration of power while ensuring competence governed decisions. The cave system at Masdazil in southern France stretches 1,400 feet through a mountain, with chambers large enough to house 500 people. Archaeological evidence from 25,000 years ago shows simultaneous occupation by multiple cultural groups, distinguished by different tool-making styles, different artistic traditions, different burial practices. These groups lived side by side for months, sharing space but maintaining distinct identities. How did they manage this without constant warfare? The answer lies in symbolic communication, the development of markers that signified identity, territory, and social bonds. The Venus figurines that appear across Europe during this period represent one example. These small sculptures, typically 4 to 6 inches tall, depict female forms carved from mammoth ivory or limestone. They appear simultaneously across 30,000 miles, from France to Siberia, showing stylistic similarities that suggest shared cultural concepts despite vast geographic separation. Creating a Venus figurine requires considerable skill and time. The ivory must be carefully selected, free from cracks that would cause splitting during carving. The work demands hours of patient effort with stone tools, removing material grain by grain, revealing the form hidden within. The final polishing uses fine sand mixed with water, creating surfaces smooth as glass. These were not casual creations, but investments of time and expertise, objects of value in societies where every hour spent on non-survival activities represented risk. Yet they were made in great numbers and travelled great distances. Why? Because they served functions beyond aesthetics. They were trade goods, moving along networks that connected distant groups. They were gifts that sealed alliances, creating obligations and relationships that might prove crucial during times of scarcity. They were markers of shared cultural identity, proof that the maker belonged to a network of groups who recognized these symbols and the social contracts they represented. The trading networks themselves were marvels of organization spanning thousands of miles. Mediterranean shells appear in caves in Germany, 800 miles from the nearest coast. Amber from Baltic shores reaches caves in the Pyrenees. Flint from specific quarries known for superior quality travels 500 miles through multiple territorial boundaries. Each exchange represented more than commerce. It represented an alliance, a relationship between groups who might need each other during desperate times. Consider the journey of a single Mediterranean shell to a German cave. The distance is 800 miles. A determined walker could cover this in 3 months. Yet, archaeological evidence suggests such shells took approximately 6 years to make the journey. Why? Because the shell did not travel in one continuous expedition but passed through 20 different tribal territories, changing hands at each boundary. Each exchange reinforced relationships, created obligations, built the social infrastructure that allowed information and resources to flow across the landscape. These networks transmitted more than objects. They transmitted ideas, techniques, innovations. The method for hafting spear points, developed in one region, spreads along trading routes and appears in distant caves within a generation. Artistic styles influenced neighboring groups, creating regional variations on common themes. Methods for food preservation, improvements in fire management, innovations in clothing construction, all flow along the same paths that carry shells and amber and carefully crafted tools. Language complexity exploded during these winter gatherings. When bands lived in isolation, communication needs were simple coordinate hunts, discuss immediate dangers, maintain social bonds within the small group. But when 300 people from multiple bands gathered in caves like Mas Dazil, of linguistic demands intensified dramatically. The acoustics of these large cave systems enabled new forms of communication. A speaker positioned correctly in certain chambers could address 200 people simultaneously without shouting. The natural amplification of human voice in these spaces drove the evolution of oratory, of formal speech-making, of the ability to address crowds. This in turn required grammatical structures capable of maintaining listener attention, of building arguments that persuaded rather than simply informed. Complex hunting plans requiring coordinated movements of 40 hunters across territories spanning 50 square miles demanded precise communication. The ability to describe locations not immediately visible, events that occurred in the past or might occur in the future, hypothetical scenarios and contingency plans, all this required grammatical structures more sophisticated than earlier human language possessed. Verb tenses emerged or became more nuanced. Conditional constructions, if this happens, then do that, became necessary for planning. Embedded clauses allowed complex descriptions of relationships between events. Abstract nouns permitted discussion of concepts like trust, obligation, territory, identity. The language you speak in this cave is not primitive but fully modern human language, capable of expressing any thought, any observation, any philosophical speculation that might occur to the human mind. Social hierarchies solidified through these linguistic developments. Those who spoke most effectively, who could articulate complex plans and convince others of their merit, gained influence disproportionate to their physical abilities. The evolution of human society increasingly favored intelligence over strength, communication skills over fighting prowess, cooperation over competition. This shift is visible in skeletal remains from this period. Earlier, human species showed significant size differences between males and females, suggesting male competition for mating opportunities through physical combat. But by 25,000 years ago, human sexual dimorphism had decreased substantially. Males and females were becoming more similar in size and strength, suggesting that mate selection depended less on fighting ability and more on other traits: intelligence, social, skills, artistic ability, the capacity to contribute to group survival through knowledge rather than muscle. The role of women in these gatherings challenges many assumptions about prehistoric gender divisions. Archaeological evidence paints a picture more nuanced than simple hunter-gatherer stereotypes might suggest. Women's skeletons show the same wear patterns from tool use as men's, indicating similar activities. Burial goods show no consistent pattern of gender differentiation. Some of the richest burials, containing the finest tools and most elaborate decorations, are female. The hand stencils in painted caves are 70% female and juvenile, suggesting artistic expression was not the exclusive domain of male specialists. What emerges is a picture of societies where gender roles existed, but were more flexible than often assumed. Women participated in tool-making, in artistic creation, in activities requiring skill and producing objects of value. The division of labor existed. Pregnancy and nursing imposed real constraints, but it was not absolute. The survival of the group depended on everyone's contributions, and capability mattered more than gender in determining who performed which tasks. The elderly occupied positions of unique importance in these gatherings. In a world without writing, where knowledge existed only in memory, anyone who survived past 50 was a living library. They remembered weather patterns from decades ago, migration routes of animals that might have shifted, locations of distant resources, tribal histories and alliances, techniques for handling rare emergencies. Their presence in winter gatherings made them consultants on matters requiring historical perspective. Respect for the elderly was not mere sentiment, but pragmatism born from necessity. They had survived conditions that killed others. They embodied proven strategies for endurance. When they spoke about preparing for unusual weather events or managing resources during extended hardship, people listened because their advice was tested by decades of survival. To ignore their counsel was to reject knowledge purchased at the cost of a lifetime's experience. Children in these gatherings learned not just from their parents, but from the entire assembled community. A child might learn fire management from the master firekeeper, flint knapping from the best toolmaker, animal tracking from an experienced hunter, and plant identification from an elderly woman who had gathered food for 50 years. This distributed education system meant knowledge spread more effectively, innovations were transmitted more reliably, and the loss of any individual, always a risk, in Ice Age life did not erase specialized knowledge. Play served explicit educational functions. Children mimicked hunting with small spears, practiced fire starting with miniature bow drills, carved soft stones in imitation of master artisans. Adults tolerated and encouraged this play because it represented education through simulation, learning through safe practice of skills that would later determine survival. The games were not frivolous, but rehearsal for adult responsibilities. The concept of childhood itself, a protected period for learning before taking on adult responsibilities, emerged or solidified during this era. In simpler societies, children contribute to survival as soon as physically capable, but the complexity of Ice Age survival meant effective adults required years of training. Childhood extended to allow this learning, with adolescence as a transition period where young people practiced adult skills under supervision before taking on full responsibility. These winter gatherings became incubators of human potential. The pressure of crowding and limited resources could have torn communities apart. Instead, it forced innovations in social organization that laid groundwork for everything, that followed villages, cities, nations, civilizations. The diet hierarchies established here were not imposed by force, but emerged from recognition of competence. The networks built here connected groups across landscapes and generations. When spring arrived and bands dispersed to their separate territories, they carried with them new tools, new techniques, new stories, new alliances. The winter had been survived through cooperation. The species had discovered that together, humans could endure what individuals could not, could accomplish what isolation made impossible, could create social structures that multiplied effectiveness beyond the sum of individual abilities. The fire in the main chamber illuminates faces from 3 different bands gathered this winter. Each group maintains its own sleeping area, its own traditions, its own identity. But they share the fire, share stored food according to need, share the burden of fuel gathering and cooking and childcare. They are learning to be more than isolated tribes. They are becoming, slowly and without conscious intention, the foundation of nations, not through conquest or force, but through the simple recognition that survival requires cooperation, that humanity's greatest strength lies not in individual prowess, but in collective organization. Outside, the wind howls across tundra, where nothing moves except driven snow. Inside, 300 people create warmth through proximity, maintain life through shared effort, build the social complexity that will eventually span continents. The cave serves as incubator for something unprecedented in Earth's history, a species whose power derives not from claws or speed or natural weapons, but from the ability to organize, communicate, cooperate across kinship lines and territorial boundaries. The gatherings will end with spring's return, but the relationships forged here, the innovations developed, the social structures established, these will persist, carrying forward into new seasons, New generations, new possibilities. The birth of nations began in these overcrowded caves during the coldest winters, driven by necessity and enabled by the unique human capacity for cultural evolution that operates faster than genetic change, that allows adaptation within generations rather than across millennia. The story continues, generation building upon generation, complexity upon complexity, toward futures these ancestors cannot imagine, but are nonetheless creating through every moment of survival, every act of cooperation, every choice to work together rather than fight alone. The cave provides shelter, but survival demands ventures into the killing cold beyond its protective stone embrace. Every calorie spent in the frozen world outside must return 3 calories, or body weight declines, strength diminishes, and death approaches through the insidious arithmetic of starvation. This is the fundamental equation of Ice Age existence. Energy in must exceed energy out, or the equation resolves to 0. Your body burns approximately 2,000 calories daily, just maintaining basic functions, heartbeat, breathing, cellular metabolism, brain activity. But in temperatures of -30 degrees Celsius, thermoregulation alone demands an additional 3,000 calories. Your core temperature must remain at 37 degrees Celsius, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. The 70-degree differential between internal body and external environment represents a heat gradient that physics will relentlessly try to equalize. Every moment outside is a battle against thermodynamics, your metabolism fighting to maintain the temperature difference that separates life from death. 5,000 calories daily. This is not negotiable. Fall short and your body begins consuming itself, first fat reserves, then muscle tissue. Finally, organ function deteriorates as the body cannibalizes whatever it can to maintain core temperature and essential processes. A person can survive weeks without food in temperate climates. In Ice Age winter, starvation kills within days once reserves are depleted. So the hunts continue. They must. But hunting in -30-degree weather presents challenges that compound exponentially. Exposed skin develops frostbite within 5 minutes. Fingers lose dexterity within 2 minutes, making it impossible to hold spears or manipulate tools. Breathing the ultra-cold air causes bronchial constriction, reduced oxygen uptake, dangerous coughing that can alert prey or predators. And perhaps most dangerously, intense cold impairs judgment, mild hypothermia, creates confusion and poor decision-making before the victim even realizes their core temperature has dropped. The solution emerged 26,000 years ago, with an invention so transformative that it ranks among humanity's greatest achievements: the eyed needle. Consider this simple tool, a sliver of bone or ivory, perhaps 3 inches long, with a hole pierced through one end. Making it requires incredible precision, drilling a hole through bone without breaking it, smoothing the edges so thread does not snag, creating a point sharp enough to pierce leather but not so fragile it shatters with use. But this simple tool revolutionized cold adaptation. Before the eyed needle, clothing was crude animal skins draped over the body, tied in place with sinew or plant fibers. Such garments trapped some heat but allowed cold air to circulate, permitted moisture from perspiration to accumulate, and provided gaps where wind could penetrate. They were better than nothing but inadequate for true Arctic survival. The eyed needle enabled sewn clothing multiple layers, fitted precisely to the body, sealed against wind, designed to trap air in insulating pockets. The outer layer of reindeer fur, with hair still attached, sheds snow and breaks wind. The middle layer of reversed fur, with hair against skin, creates an air gap that provides insulation. The inner layer of soft leather absorbs perspiration before it can dampen outer layers and destroy their insulating properties. This 3-layer system maintains body core temperature at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, even when external temperature reaches -58 degrees Celsius. The physics is elegant. Each layer of trapped air acts as insulation, Each barrier reduces heat transfer. The combined effect creates a portable microclimate that travels with the wearer. But creating such clothing requires extraordinary effort. A complete outfit for one person requires the hides of 6 reindeer, carefully selected for quality and thickness. The preparation of each hide takes days, scraping away fat and tissue, treating with animal brains to soften the leather, smoking to prevent decay, cutting to patterns refined over generations for optimal fit and movement. Then comes the sewing, using sinew thread tendons from animal legs that are strong, flexible, and last years. Without rotting, the seamstress creates seams that are simultaneously strong and flexible, that do not bind movement, that seal against wind but allow moisture vapor to escape. A complete outfit requires approximately 80 hours of work by skilled hands. In a world where every hour represents survival effort, 80 hours is an immense investment. Yet everyone who ventures outside wears such clothing, because without it, hunting becomes impossible. Without it, gathering firewood kills. Without it, checking snares or maintaining the ice block windbreak at the cave entrance means frostbite and amputation, and slow death from gangrene. The clothing transforms humans into animals adapted for Arctic survival. You can now remain outside for hours instead of minutes. You can move, work, hunt in conditions that would kill a naked human in 10 minutes. You have, in effect, evolved not through genetic change but through technological innovation, extending your environmental range through external adaptation rather than internal modification. This is the key to human success. Other species must wait for evolution to adjust them to changing climates, a process taking thousands or millions of years. Humans simply make better clothing. The mammoth hunts represent the ultimate test of cold adaptation and coordinated strategy. These animals are the largest land mammals since the dinosaurs vanished 65 million years ago. An adult bull stands 13 feet at the shoulder, weighs 12,000 pounds, and can knock down full-grown trees with its tusks. Its thick hide, insulating fat layer, and dense fur make it nearly invulnerable to any individual hunter with primitive weapons. Yet humans hunt them successfully. How? The answer is persistence and knowledge of animal physiology. Mammoths are powerful, but have limited endurance for sustained pursuit. A hunt might last 72 hours, with 20 hunters maintaining continuous pressure, never letting the animal rest, driving it relentlessly across 40 miles of frozen landscape. The hunters work in shifts, some tracking while others rest, but always keeping the mammoth moving, always preventing it from feeding or drinking. The mammoth burns calories at a tremendous rate, maintaining its massive body heat. After 24 hours without food, it begins consuming fat reserves. After 48 hours, it slows noticeably. After 72 hours, exhaustion makes it vulnerable. The hunters drive it toward their chosen killing ground, typically a bog or stream bed, where the animal's immense weight becomes a liability, where it mires in mud or ice, gives way beneath its bulk. Then comes the actual kill, 20 spears thrown or thrust simultaneously from multiple angles, targeting specific points where knowledge of anatomy identifies vulnerabilities behind the front leg, where ribs protect the heart, into the abdomen where penetration reaches vital organs, into the throat where major blood vessels lie close to the surface. Even wounded mortally, a mammoth might take hours to die. The hunters maintain distance, watching for signs of weakening, ready to flee if the animal charges. When it finally collapses, they must work quickly. They need to process 30,000 pounds of meat before cold causes freezing that makes butchery impossible, or before predators, cave lions, dire wolves, other human bands arrive to claim the carcass. 30,000 pounds of meat. This single kill provides enough protein to feed a band of 30 people for 4 months. The energy investment, 20 hunters, burning 8,000 calories daily for 3 days, equals 400, 80,000 calories expended returns approximately 30 million calories. The mathematics makes sense. This is why the hunts continue despite danger and hardship. But mammoths are not the only resource. The Ice Age landscape, seemingly barren, actually teems with life for those who know where to look and when to search. Reindeer migrate in herds of thousands, following routes they have used for millennia, moving between summer and winter ranges. Your ancestors learned these patterns through centuries of observation. They know that in early winter, the herds pass through the valley below the cave, funneled between ridges into predictable killing zones. Hunters position themselves along these routes, use fire to direct herd movements, employ coordinated drives that separate young or injured animals from protective groups. Arctic hare, though small, are numerous and relatively easy to snare. One person checking traplines daily can harvest 5 or 6 hares per week, providing perhaps 3,000 calories of meat plus valuable fur. The mathematics of small game, less exciting than mammoth hunts, but more reliable, more consistent, equally important to survival. Fish in rivers and lakes remain active even under ice. Your people have learned to chip holes through ice 2 feet thick, to lower lines baited with preserved meat, to wait with patience born from necessity. Winter fishing is miserable work, kneeling on ice in -20-degree cold, hands wet and freezing, waiting for the subtle pull that signals a catch. But a good fishing hole might yield 10 pounds of fish per day, and fish fat is particularly valuable for its concentrated calories and for use in oil lamps. The atlatl, invented 18,000 years ago, represents another leap in hunting technology. This device, essentially a throwing stick with a hook on one end, acts as a lever arm extending the human shoulder joint. By lengthening the arc of the throwing motion, it increases the velocity of the spear by approximately 3 times. The physics is straightforward leverage. The human arm generates perhaps 30 miles per hour of throwing velocity. The atlatl, increasing the radius of the throwing arc, generates 90 miles per hour. At these velocities, a spear can penetrate mammoth hide at ranges of 30 yards, 3 times farther than hand-thrown projectiles. This increased range means safer hunting, more successful kills, fewer injuries to hunters who previously had to approach within death-dealing range of dangerous prey. Making an atlatl requires selecting wood with precise properties, flexible enough to store and release energy, rigid enough not to break under stress. The balance must be exact, the hook must engage the spear securely, the grip must allow comfortable hold during the throwing motion. Master craftspeople create atlatls as individual as the hunters who use them, adjusting dimensions to match each person's height, arm length, throwing style. Weather prediction evolved from casual observation to survival science. Your ancestors discovered that specific signs predict weather changes with remarkable accuracy. A ring around the moon means ice crystals in the upper atmosphere, indicating storm approach within 36 hours with 80% reliability. Certain cloud formations, high cirrus, followed by descending stratus, predict temperature drops of 20 degrees Celsius within 6 hours. The behavior of animals provides additional data. Ravens gathering in unusual numbers sense pressure changes, imperceptible to humans. Reindeer suddenly moving from high ground to valleys signal blizzards approaching. The increased activity of normally quiet ptarmigan indicates major weather systems. This knowledge determines survival. Being caught in open tundra during a sudden blizzard means death within hours. Snow, driven by 70-mile-per-hour winds, creates whiteout conditions where visibility drops to arm's length, where temperature with wind chill plunges to -70 degrees Celsius, where exposed skin freezes within 60 seconds. People lost in such storms are found frozen solid, sometimes only yards from shelter they could not see through the blinding white chaos. But predicting storms allows preparation. Extra firewood gets brought inside, frozen meat stores are secured, the cave entrance gets reinforced with ice blocks. People settle in the warmest chambers, and wait for the weather to pass, playing games, telling stories, maintaining fires, surviving through patience and the shelter that stone provides. The competition with cave bears adds another dimension to survival strategy. These massive animals standing 8 feet tall, weighing 1,500 pounds, are not primarily aggressive, but they are territorial and unpredictable. For 40,000 years, humans and cave bears competed for the same caves, the same resources, the same sheltered spaces, in an environment where shelter meant everything. The relationship was complex, sometimes cooperative, sometimes antagonistic, always carefully managed. Bears entering hibernation in autumn pose little threat. They are focused on finding sleeping chambers and building fat reserves. Bears emerging in spring are hungry, irritable, dangerous. Males especially, having I lost 30% of body weight during hibernation, are aggressive in their search for food. But approximately 24,000 years ago, cave bears vanished. The extinction coincided precisely with human population increases that exceeded environmental carrying capacity by 30%. Whether humans hunted bears to extinction, outcompeted them for cave access, or disrupted their food sources remains debated. What is certain? Humans survived, and cave bears did not. This may represent humanity's first extinction event, the first species driven to disappearance by human activity. It would not be the last. As human populations grow and hunting efficiency increases, megafauna begin disappearing. The mammoth, the woolly rhinoceros, the giant elk, all will follow the cave bear into oblivion within the next few thousand years. But here, now, in this moment 26,000 years ago, the tools work, the clothing protects, the strategies succeed. You venture into winter's kingdom wearing the technology that your ancestors invented, following the knowledge they accumulated, hunting with the skills they refined. The cold cannot kill you, because intelligence has made you its match. As you return to the cave with fresh meat, warmth gradually returning to chilled extremities, you embody humanity's triumph over an environment designed to destroy you. Not through physical adaptation, you are still hairless, vulnerable, physiologically unsuited for extreme cold, but through innovation, cooperation, transmitted knowledge, you have conquered winter. The cave entrance welcomes you home, stone walls promising warmth and safety, and the fire that never dies. 11,700 years ago, the world changed with a speed that would have seemed impossible to your ancestors who lived through millennia of glacial consistency. The temperature rose 8 degrees Celsius in less than 50 years. Think about that. 50 years, not the geological epochs across, which previous climate shifts had occurred, not the thousands of years that ice sheets took to advance or retreat. 50 years, 2 human generations, and the fundamental character of the planet transformed. The ice sheets that had dominated the northern hemisphere for 90,000 years began their collapse. 3 million cubic miles of ice, accumulated over epochs, started melting. The water had to go somewhere. Sea levels rose 400 feet, drowning coastlines, transforming landscapes, redrawing the map of the world with liquid inevitability. The Bering Land Bridge, that 2,000-kilometre-wide grassland that had connected Asia and America for 60,000 years, vanished beneath the waves. The British Isles separated from mainland Europe as the North Sea filled. The Mediterranean, which had been a series of isolated lakes during the glacial maximum, reconnected to the Atlantic. Caves that had sheltered humanity for 40,000 years, flooded as rising waters reached elevations that had been safely above sea level for longer than human memory could reach. Your cave, positioned in the hills, survived the flooding, but it became unnecessary. When temperatures warmed, when ice retreated, when forests reclaimed the tundra at rates of 30 miles per decade, the desperate need for stone shelter diminished. The climate that had made caves essential for survival moderated into something more forgiving, more accommodating to human habitation. The forests returned first. Pine and birch, species that had survived in small refugia during the worst of the cold, spread northward following the retreating ice. Within centuries, landscapes that had been barren tundra for 50,000 years transformed into woodland. Oak and elm and ash followed the pioneers, creating diverse ecosystems where ice had permitted only the hardiest grasses and lichens. The megafauna, paradoxically, did not thrive in this new abundance. The mammoth steppe ecosystem, that unique grassland that supported the highest biomass densities in Earth's history, vanished as forests replaced open terrain. Mammoths, adapted for grazing across vast treeless expanses, found their habitat fragmenting, shrinking, disappearing. Woolly rhinoceros, giant elk, cave lions, all the charismatic megafauna that had defined the Ice Age declined rapidly. Were humans responsible? The question haunts future archaeologists. The timing is suggestive. Human populations expanded dramatically at exactly the moment megafauna populations collapsed. Hunting efficiency had reached levels where humans could harvest large animals faster than those animals could reproduce. The invention of better weapons, more sophisticated driving techniques, coordinated multi-band hunts, all created pressure that stable populations might have withstood, but declining populations could not. The mammoth, that symbol of Ice Age survival, vanished from most of its range by 10,000 years ago. Small populations survived on isolated islands. Wrangel Island in the Arctic Ocean maintained a dwarf mammoth population until 4,000 years ago, living contemporaneously with the Egyptian pyramids. But the vast herds that had sustained your ancestors through 40,000 years of Ice Age existence were gone, hunted to extinction, or unable to adapt to changing habitat, or most likely destroyed by the combined pressures of climate change and human predation. Your descendants, living through this transformation, barely perceived it as catastrophe. To them, it was simply change gradual enough that each generation adapted, shifted strategies, found new food sources to replace disappearing ones. The accumulated knowledge of 40,000 years of cave dwelling did not vanish. It transformed. Fire management techniques refined for maintaining flames in cold, damp caves translated directly to hearths in constructed shelters. Stone tool-making expertise shifted from large spear points for megafauna hunting to smaller, more precise tools for processing deer, boar, fish, the animals of the new forested world. Social organizational skills developed during winter gatherings of 300 people in cave systems scaled up to permanent villages of 500 or more. But perhaps most remarkably, the impulse toward artistic expression, toward recording knowledge and experience on stone surfaces, evolved into something unprecedented. At Göbekli Tepe, in what is now Turkey, 12,000 years ago, people who had recently abandoned cave dwelling erected stone circles using pillars weighing 16 tons. These were not homes. They were monuments, ceremonial spaces built with engineering principles developed for cave fortification, decorated with carvings showing the animals that had sustained humanity through the Ice Age. The builders of Göbekli Tepe were former cave dwellers, or children of cave dwellers, applying accumulated knowledge to new purposes. They understood leverage and force distribution from moving stones to block cave entrances against predators. They understood artistic composition from painting cave walls by lamplight. They understood social organization from managing multi-band gatherings in underground chambers. All this knowledge, forged in stone over 40,000 years, now expressed itself in surface constructions that announced humanity's new confidence. We no longer hide in caves, we build on open ground. We transform landscapes rather than sheltering within them. The transition from caves to constructed dwellings required only 3 centuries. Archaeological evidence shows the progression. First, simple windbreaks and temporary structures built near cave entrances, then more substantial shelters in locations near caves, allowing retreat to stone safety if needed. Finally, permanent villages constructed in open valleys and plains, with caves serving only as storage or emergency refuges. The final cave paintings at Niao in southern France, created 11,500 years ago, show something unprecedented in Ice Age art. Architectural plans. These are not images of animals or hunting scenes, but geometric diagrams, rectangular structures, circular foundations, and layouts of what appear to be building complexes. The artists were planning surface construction, using cave walls as drawing boards to work out designs before implementation. This moment represents a threshold. The accumulated knowledge is not discarded but redirected. The physics of fire management becomes the foundation for pottery firing. The first fired clay vessels appear simultaneously in caves from Japan to the Jordan Valley, using principles learned from maintaining careful temperatures in cave hearths. The understanding of stone fracture patterns that produced perfect flint tools scales up to quarrying and shaping building blocks. The social complexity that emerged from winter gatherings becomes the basis for permanent settlements where hundreds of people live year-round in close proximity. Modern excavations using ground-penetrating radar reveal the full scope of cave occupation. Layers of habitation debris reach 90 feet deep in some locations. Each centimeter represents approximately 50 years of human activity. Discarded tools, ash from 10,000 fires, bone fragments from meals, lost ornaments, broken pottery from later periods. The mathematics is sobering. 90 feet at 1 centimeter per 50 years equals 450,000 years of accumulated history compressed into sedimentary layers. But it is not 450,000 years. Cave occupation intensified over time. The deepest, oldest layers might represent sparse, intermittent use. The middle layers show increasing density of artifacts. The upper layers, from the final Ice Age millenniums, show almost continuous occupation. The 90 feet actually represents approximately 60,000 years of increasingly intensive human presence. Within these layers lie the genetic signatures of 16,000 individuals. DNA extracted from bone fragments, from teeth, from the calcified deposits on stone tools, and where blood and tissue left. Molecular traces. All this material allows reconstruction of population genetics across epochs. And the analysis reveals something remarkable. 90% of modern Europeans carry genetic markers from these cave dwellers. You are connected directly to present populations. Your DNA will persist through 300 generations, will survive the rise and fall of empires, will pass through plagues and wars and migrations, will eventually spread across entire continents. People living 12,000 years in your future, using technologies you cannot imagine, will carry fragments of your genome in their cells. This is a different kind of immortality than your ancestors could have imagined. They sought to endure through stories passed down, through children who survived, through cave paintings that recorded their presence. They succeeded beyond any possible expectation. Modern humans study those paintings with tools that can analyze pigment chemistry, determine exact creation dates, reconstruct the hands that held the brushes. The artists live on through their work in ways that transcend any individual memory. But there is something else, something the cave dwellers could not have foreseen and future generations must reckon with. Climate models analyzing current anthropogenic changes predict feedback loops identical to the Younger Dryas event, a brief but intense period of cold that occurred 12,800 years ago, interrupting the general warming trend. Ocean current patterns disrupted by melting ice created sudden temperature plunges, returning Ice Age conditions for over 1,000 years before warming resumed. Modern climate change proceeds faster than the Younger Dryas. Current carbon dioxide concentrations exceed any level experienced during the entire Ice Age. Temperature increases occurring over decades would have taken millennia during natural climate transitions. The rapidity of change creates stress on ecosystems, on agricultural systems, on human societies that have optimized for stable conditions. The caves remain. The limestone that sheltered your ancestors still exists, still maintains those stable temperatures, still offers refuge from surface extremes. If surface temperatures exceed habitable ranges, projections suggest this could occur within 2 centuries. In some regions, humanity might return to its ancient refuges. The knowledge of cave survival, preserved in archaeological records, might become relevant again, not as history, but as survival manual. This is not prediction, but possibility. The caves represent proof that humanity can survive extreme climate conditions through knowledge and adaptation. Your ancestors endured conditions that kill modern humans in hours. They thrived for 40,000 years in an environment of relentless cold. If future generations face analogous challenges from relentless heat, they can draw on this heritage of survival through intelligence rather than strength, through cooperation rather than competition, through maintained knowledge rather than genetic adaptation. The fire in this cave burns down to embers as this story approaches its end. But endings are illusions. The fire will be rebuilt tomorrow, as it has been rebuilt every morning for 8 months, as it will be rebuilt for generations more before this cave is finally abandoned. The knowledge passes forward. The DNA persists. The painted animals on cave walls wait in darkness to teach future observers about the world that was, the people who lived through it, the triumph of consciousness over adversity. You are a cave dweller, 26,000 years before the present, but you are also the ancestor of billions. Every person reading these words or hearing this narration carries your legacy genes that survived the Ice Age, cultural knowledge that emerged from stone shelters, the fundamental human capacity to learn, adapt, cooperate, and endure. The cave accepted your ancestors when they were few and desperate. It sheltered them through the longest winter in human history. It became classroom and cathedral, fortress and gallery, womb and tomb. Within stone walls 300 million years old, humanity discovered itself and learned to create art, to organize societies, to engineer survival, to transform knowledge into culture and culture into survival. The ice released its grip 11,700 years ago. Humanity emerged from the caves and spread across the warming world, building civilizations on foundations laid in darkness. But the caves remain, waiting patiently, holding secrets and stories and evidence of what humans can endure when extinction seems inevitable. The journey that brought your ancestors from Africa to this cave took 60,000 years and 2,000 generations. The journey from cave dwelling to modern civilization took only 11,000 years and 400 generations. The pace of change accelerates, the challenges evolve, but the fundamental human response remains constant. Observe, learn, adapt, cooperate, survive. Outside, the Ice Age wind continues its ancient howl. Inside, the fire glows warm, and consciousness, that greatest mystery, that most improbable gift, contemplates its own existence and finds the contemplation worth preserving in paint on stone, worth transmitting to children, worth carrying forward into unknown futures. The cave breathes its eternal rhythm, the stone endures, and humanity, temporary resident of this ancient shelter, continues its impossible journey through time.